July 1957, and just after midnight. Lenox Avenue, Harlem. The street lights were on, but the block was quiet, the kind of quiet that makes every footstep sound like a confession. Bumpy Johnson stepped out of a black Cadillac and paused. He always paused. Not to look tough, to listen. Shoes on concrete. A bus exhaling somewhere down the avenue. A radio humming through an open window. Then it happened. A man came out of a recessed doorway no more than 6 feet away. He raised a pistol. No warning, no words. The gun fired, the shot cracked the air, sharp, violent, final, and somehow, Bumpy Johnson did not fall. The bullet missed. Point blank. Clean miss. The shooter froze, half a second too long. Bumpy didn't run, didn't duck, didn't even reach for a weapon. He turned his head slowly, eyes locked on the man who had just tried and failed to erase him. The hitman bolted. By the time Bumpy's driver pulled a gun, the shooter was gone, swallowed by the alleys between Lenox and 7th. That was the incident. No mystery about it. Someone sent a professional to kill Bumpy Johnson in public at arm's length, and the professional failed. And everyone in Harlem knew what that meant. This wasn't a warning shot. It wasn't a scare tactic. You don't miss from 6 feet unless something goes wrong, or someone does. Within minutes, words started moving faster than police radios, barbershops, after-hours clubs, apartment stairwells. The same sentence repeated with different voices. They tried to take him out, and he's still breathing. But the real danger didn't come from the gunshot. It came from what followed. Because when an assassination fails, the question isn't who pulled the trigger, it's who ordered it and who helped them get close enough. Bumpy stood there another second, staring at the empty doorway. He didn't chase. He didn't shout. He simply said one thing to his driver, low and controlled. Drive. The Cadillac rolled away, tires whispering over asphalt. No sirens, no crowd, just a city holding its breath. By morning, everyone would have a theory, a rival crew, an Italian syndicate, a hungry lieutenant looking to move up. But Bumpy already knew something was off. This hit was too clean to be sloppy and too sloppy to be clean. A professional doesn't miss like that unless the gun jams, the handshakes, or the plan was rushed. And rushed plans usually mean pressure. Somebody was desperate enough to try killing him in the open. Somebody needed him gone now. That urgency changed everything, because Bumpy Johnson wasn't just alive, he was alert. And survival in that moment meant making a choice before the next bullet didn't miss. Do you strike back immediately and risk hitting the wrong target? Or do you wait, knowing the person who betrayed you might be sitting at your table tomorrow? As the Cadillac disappeared into the night, one thing became certain across Harlem. The failed shot didn't end the story. It started a countdown. And the next move would decide who stayed breathing and who didn't. So who set the hit in motion? And how close were they to Bumpy when they did it? By sunrise, the story had reached every corner of Harlem. By noon, it reached Earl Dixon. Earl was 34 years old, thin, careful, and the kind of man who counted his steps when he walked upstairs. He ran numbers collections for 3 blocks near 135th Street. Nothing flashy, just envelopes, names, and quiet promises. He also had a problem. His wife, Lena, was sick. Not the kind you shake off with rest. Hospital visits, prescriptions that didn't come cheap, and a landlord who didn't care why rent came late. That morning, Earl stood in their apartment kitchen holding an envelope that felt heavier than it should have. Inside was cash, more than he usually touched in a month. It wasn't Bumpy's money. That was the problem. The night before the shooting, Earl had been called to the back room of a bar he didn't usually enter. The man waiting for him didn't smile, didn't sit, didn't waste words. "All you gotta do," the man said, "is tell us where he steps out." Earl knew exactly who he was. Bumpy Johnson didn't need introductions in Harlem, and everyone who worked under him understood one rule clearly: you don't help anyone get close to him. Earl had tried to refuse. "I just collect," he said. "I don't—" The man cut him off and slid the envelope across the table. "For your wife." That was the knife. Not the threat, not the money, the timing. They knew about Lena, they knew about the hospital, they knew Earl had been skipping meals so she could eat. And they didn't ask again. All Earl gave them was a detail, one small thing. What nights Bumpy usually came by Lennox, which doorway he favored, where the Cadillac slowed. Earl told himself it wasn't pulling a trigger. He told himself it was just information. He told himself it wouldn't even happen. Until the gunshot echoed down Lenox Avenue. Now, standing in his kitchen, Earl's hands shook as he folded the newspaper. The headline wasn't bold, just a line buried halfway down the page. "Attempt on Harlem figure fails." Fails. Which meant Bumpy was alive, which meant Earl was exposed. By afternoon, the streets felt different. Conversation stopped when Earl walked past. A barber he'd known for years avoided eye contact. Someone had already started asking quiet questions. Not out loud. Never out loud. Earl knew how this went. When a hit failed, the search for leaks began immediately. Phones didn't ring. Men showed up instead. That evening, Earl was told to report to one of Bumpy's spots. No explanation. Just a message passed hand to hand. "Tonight." Lena watched him put on his jacket. She could tell something was wrong. She always could. "Don't go," she said. He kissed her forehead and lied. "I'll be quick." On the walk over, Earl replayed every second of the meeting in the bar. Every word he'd spoken, every word he hadn't. He told himself he'd done it for family, that it wasn't betrayal, it was survival. But survival has a price, and Earl could feel it coming due. Inside the building, the hallway smelled like smoke and old wood. A door opened at the end. Light spilled out. Voices inside. Low, controlled. Earl stopped just short of the threshold. If he stepped through that door, he might walk out free, or he might not walk out at all. And the worst part? He didn't know whether Bumpy Johnson already knew his name. Was Earl about to face questioning or judgment? The room wasn't loud. That was what scared Earl. No music, no laughter, just a table, a few chairs, and men who didn't fidget. The kind of stillness that meant decisions had already been made, or were about to be. Bumpy Johnson sat at the far end, jacket off, sleeves rolled, a glass untouched in front of him. He didn't look angry. He looked focused, like a man balancing numbers in his head. Earl stayed near the door. "Sit," Bumpy said. Earl did. Slowly, every nerve in his body screaming not to move too fast. They didn't start with the shooting. They started with routine. "How long you been collecting on 135th? Who shorted you last week? How's your wife doing?" That last question landed wrong. Earl swallowed. "She's managing." Bumpy nodded as if confirming a detail he already knew. Minutes stretched. Earl answered everything honestly, because half-truths were worse than lies in a room like this. No one raised their voice. No one accused him of anything. That was the pressure. Finally, Bumpy leaned back. Someone told a stranger where I step out, he said calmly. Didn't tell him right, though. Earl felt the room tighten. The gun went off too early, Bumpy continued, or the shooter rushed. Either way, information was incomplete. He looked directly at Earl. People don't rush unless they're scared. Earl's mouth went dry. Bumpy didn't ask if Earl was involved. He didn't need to. Instead, he laid out the choice. I find out who talked, he said, or they come tell me themselves. No threat, no timeline, just inevitability. Earl understood the math instantly. If he confessed, he might live, but briefly. If he didn't, someone else might point him out to save themselves. After the meeting, Earl was dismissed like nothing had happened. Go home, Bumpy said. Take care of your business. Outside, the air felt heavier than before. Earl walked fast, heart pounding, certain he was being followed, even when he wasn't. That night, he didn't sleep. He sat by the window, watching shadows move on the sidewalk below, every passing car sounding like a verdict. Near dawn, there was a knock at the door. Not loud, not urgent, controlled. Earl opened it to find the same man from the bar, the one who'd given him the envelope. He looked annoyed now, not worried, annoyed. You said he'd be alone, the man said. Earl shook his head. I told you what I knew. The man stepped inside without asking. The shooter's gone, he said. Skipped town, which means someone's got to clean this up. Earl backed away. I'm done. The man smiled thinly. No, you're not. He explained it quickly, too quickly. Bumpy was alive. Suspicious, dangerous, and now the people who ordered the hit needed leverage, something to keep Earl quiet, something to push him further in. They needed one more thing from him, a confirmation, proof of who Bumpy trusted enough to stand close that night. Earl realized then he wasn't being asked to inform anymore. He was being asked to choose a side, openly. Help finish what had started, or wait for Bumpy to decide his fate. As the man reached into his coat, Earl understood the truth too late. No matter what he chose next, someone he loved or trusted was going to pay. And the clock that started with a missed gunshot was still ticking. But what Earl didn't know was that the plan had already shifted, and he was no longer the most dangerous piece on the board. Earl thought the danger was external. He was wrong. By the time the man left his apartment, the rules had changed, and Earl hadn't noticed the most important detail. They didn't need him to do anything. They needed him to confirm something they already knew. That night, Earl didn't go home. He walked, block after block, letting the city exhaust him. When he finally stopped, it was outside a small brownstone used for private meetings, one of the places Bumpy rotated through when he wanted discretion. Two men stood outside. Familiar faces. Trusted faces. And that was when Earl felt the ground shift. The shooter hadn't missed by accident. The hit had been rushed because the order came late. The order came late because the real plan wasn't to kill Bumpy clean. It was to flush out the leak. Earl realized it all at once, like a door slamming shut in his head. Someone inside Bumpy's circle had suspected a breach. Instead of waiting for the next attempt, they'd allowed a controlled failure. Just enough chaos to force informants to panic, talk, and reveal themselves. And Earl had done exactly that. He'd met with the wrong people, taken the wrong money, answered the wrong questions. He wasn't the traitor they were hunting. He was the trail. Inside the brownstone, voices rose briefly, not shouting, tense, urgent. Earl caught fragments through an open window. said the information came through Dixon. That narrows it. Earl stepped back into the shadows, heart hammering. Then he heard a sound that froze him. Lena's name, spoken casually, like a fact already filed. That was the moment fear turned into decision. Earl didn't run. He walked straight to the front door and knocked. The men outside looked surprised, but they didn't stop him. Inside, the room fell silent. Bumpy stood near the table this time. No chair, no glass, just attention. "I think you already know," Earl said before anyone could speak. His voice shook, but he didn't stop. I talked because they knew about my wife and because I thought the bullet would end it." No one interrupted him. Earl took a breath. "But that bullet wasn't meant to end you. It was meant to expose me." A flicker of something crossed Bumpy's face. Not anger. Confirmation. "You figured it out," Bumpy said quietly. Earl nodded. "So here's the rest. The people who paid me, they're scared now because the shooter disappeared. And because they think you're coming for them." A pause. "They're wrong," Bumpy said. The room stiffened. "Because I already went." That was the twist. The retaliation everyone expected, violent, immediate, had already happened. Quietly, selectively, before rumors could harden into plans. The failed hit hadn't delayed revenge, it had covered it. Earl's knees almost gave out. "So what happens to me?" he asked. Bumpy studied him for a long second. "You told the truth," he said, "late, but all of it." He turned to one of the men. "Get him home. Make sure his wife's taken care of." Earl stared. "That's it?" Bumpy's voice dropped. "No," he said, "that's mercy." Because mercy had a cost. And Earl wouldn't understand that cost until the next morning when Harlem woke up to what had really changed overnight. And the man who missed at point-blank range turned out to be the least important player in the entire story. Harlem woke up slower than usual the next morning. Not because people were tired, because they were listening. By 8 a.m., 2 doors hadn't opened. A backroom bar on 7th stayed dark. A numbers office near 138th never lifted its gate. By noon, names started circulating, quietly, carefully. Not rumors, confirmations. The men who had pushed for the hit were gone. One fled, one disappeared. One was found alive, but stripped of everything that made him useful. No speeches, no public message, just absence. That was the consequence everyone understood. For Earl Dixon, the cost came differently. He returned home just after sunrise. Lena was sitting up in bed wrapped in a blanket, a paper cup of water on the nightstand. The apartment smelled cleaner, warmer. Someone had been there. On the table sat a pharmacy bag. Full. Paid for. No receipt. Earl didn't smile. He sat down hard, elbows on his knees, staring at the floor, because now he knew exactly what the favor meant. Lena reached for his hand. "What happened?" He didn't answer right away. "I made it worse," he said finally, "before I made it better." She didn't ask for details, she didn't need them. She squeezed his hand once and let go. That afternoon, Earl was told he was done collecting. No punishment, no reward, just removal. "You're clean," the message went, "but you're not in." It sounded generous. It wasn't. Being out meant no protection, no buffer, no second chances. The streets didn't forget faces. They just stopped accounting for them. Earl understood the irony. The information he gave, out of fear, had nearly ended everything. The truth he told, too late, had saved him. But saving his life had cost him something else. Relevance. Across Harlem, people recalculated, not loudly, not emotionally. They adjusted their routes, their alliances, their silences. The failed hit didn't create panic. It created clarity. Because the lesson wasn't that someone tried and missed. The lesson was that nothing visible had changed. And yet everything had. Earl watched from his apartment window that evening as the street returned to normal. Kids playing stickball, a couple arguing, a radio humming. Life moved on. But Earl knew better. He had survived the moment. Now he had to survive what came after. A quieter, lonelier existence, where no one owed him anything. And that was the price mercy demanded. But the streets weren't finished reacting yet, because when word finally settled, the aftershock went far beyond Earl Dixon. The streets didn't explode. They tilted. That was the aftershock. For days after the failed hit, Harlem moved with a slight hesitation, like everyone had stepped onto a floor that no longer felt level. Conversations shortened. Meetings ended earlier than planned. Men who used to linger didn't. No announcements were made. None were needed. The absence spoke louder than gunfire. Barbers noticed it first. Chairs stayed empty longer. Certain names stopped being requested. One regular never came back for his weekly shave, and nobody asked why. Numbers runners adjusted their routes without being told. One block was skipped entirely, another was suddenly too busy to linger on. These weren't orders, they were instincts. The police felt it too. Patrol cars rolled slower through Lenox, officers scanning faces that no longer lingered on corners. Fewer arrests, fewer tips, fewer chances to catch someone talking out of turn. A failed hit usually invited chaos, retaliation, noise. This one produced discipline. Because the message was clear, the danger wasn't from outside pressure. It was from inside exposure. Trust tightened. Circles shrank. People didn't ask who pulled the trigger anymore. They asked who talked and lived. That question unsettled everyone, even those who had nothing to do with the hit felt it. Every private frustration now carried a risk. Every quiet complaint sounded like the start of a mistake. As for Earl, his name didn't circulate. That was intentional. Erasing someone without killing them required more effort. No one referenced him. No one warned him. No one threatened him. He simply ceased to be useful. And that silence carried its own weight. At night, Harlem looked the same. Streetlights, footsteps, radios behind windows. But underneath it, something had hardened. The failed assassination didn't weaken control, it refined it. No more rushed plans, no more loose information, no more favors without consequences. People who once thought proximity meant safety now understood the truth. Closeness was a liability. And somewhere in that realization, a quiet shift occurred. Not in territory, not in leadership, but in behavior. The streets became less forgiving, less noisy, less careless, which meant the next mistake, whenever it came, wouldn't come with a warning shot. And the final cost of that night on Lenox Avenue was still waiting to be paid by someone who thought they'd already survived it. 3 months later, Earl Dixon stood at the same window where he used to watch the street for danger. The danger never came. That was the problem. Lena's health improved. The medicine worked. The bills stopped stacking. On paper, Earl had won. He was alive. His wife was alive. The threat had passed. But the silence didn't lift. No one knocked anymore. No one asked favors. No one even warned him when a new face lingered too long downstairs. Earl realized something most men never did until it was too late. Surviving the moment didn't mean surviving the future. He'd been spared, but also cut loose. One evening, walking home, Earl saw a young runner he didn't recognize standing where Earl used to stand. Same posture, same cautious eyes, different man. The machine hadn't stopped. It had simply replaced him. That night, Earl packed a small bag. Nothing dramatic. No goodbye notes. He left Harlem before dawn, not because he was chased, but because he was no longer counted. And that was the final irony of the missed shot. The bullet that failed to kill Bumpy Johnson erased someone else instead. Not with blood, with distance. Years later, people would still talk about the night a hitman missed from 6 feet away. They'd talk about nerves, luck, fate. What they wouldn't talk about was Earl Dixon. Because the streets don't remember everyone who survives. They remember who stays. And sometimes the real cost of mercy isn't death. It's being allowed to walk away and never matter again. If this story hit you, stay with the channel. Because the next one isn't about the man who was targeted. It's about the person who disappeared after the gunshot faded.